I actually think this is one of the best times to buy Bitcoin and crypto that I can remember in recent years. I think a lot of the risk in this market has been de-risked and the market is just sitting on the sidelines waiting for the election. But my core view is that crypto has already won the election. But if you step back and you look at this from a 30,000 foot perspective, we have positive direction in Washington. We have institutional investors allocating. We have the ETFs heating up. We have rising concern about debt and deficits. All of that to me spells six-figure Bitcoin. And my guess is we get there by the end of the year. If not, I think certainly in 2025, we have a high probability of seeing a very strong market in Bitcoin and indeed in other crypto assets. Crypto equities are in a really exciting space. You have the miners who are benefiting from the sort of dual jet packs of crypto and AI demand. You have Coinbase, which somehow maintains its near monopoly position in the retail space, an incredible business. You have MicroStrategy doing its thing. Look, there are a lot of investors out there who are still uncomfortable holding Bitcoin and Ethereum directly, and they're looking at these crypto equities as, an alternative way to get in.
Could Bitcoin actually hit $100,000 by the end of this year? Matt Hougan, the Chief Investment Officer at Bitwise Asset Management, thinks it's possible, and he's here to explain why. With institutional money pouring into crypto and the political landscape in flux, there may be more momentum for Bitcoin than most expect. If you're curious about what's fueling these bullish predictions, stick around. This could be Bitcoin's next big leap.
I actually think this is one of the best times to buy Bitcoin and crypto that I can remember in recent years. I think a lot of the risk in this market has been de-risked and the market is just sitting on the sidelines waiting for the election. But my core view is that crypto has already won the election. Regardless of what happens on November 5th, Washington is moving in a more favorable direction for crypto. And I think it's just a matter of times before the market moves to new all-time highs. So I'm sitting here biding my time, but extremely optimistic about where we're going in the next few months. Yeah, here's what I see when I look at the chart since March. Bitcoin has been trading in a range between the all-time high around 73,000 and about $50,000. And it seems to bump its head against that all-time high repeatedly and can't get over it. And that makes some behavioral sense. I think there are a lot of investors out there who are willing to sell at the all-time high. They like the idea of getting out at peak prices. But eventually, we're going to exhaust the demand to sell at that all-time high. The Bitcoin ETFs are vacuuming up record assets. We're seeing rising retail demand. And one of the reasons I think it's an interesting time to think about getting off zero is once we exhaust that selling at the all-time high, where will Bitcoin stop? In other words, if we get above 73, if we get to 74, 75, who is selling? I think the next major stopping point for Bitcoin is $100,000. I think that's where we'll again bump into people who are willing to sell. But between the all-time high of 73 and change and $100,000, I see a little bit of an air gap. I think Bitcoin could rapidly make that space if we do get above these all-time highs. That's a prediction and not a promise. But if you step back and you look at this from a 30,000 foot perspective, we have positive direction in Washington. We have institutional investors allocating. We have the ETFs heating up. We have rising concern about debt and deficits. All of that to me spells six-figure Bitcoin. And my guess is we get there by the end of the year. If not, I think certainly in 2025, we have a high probability of seeing a very strong market in Bitcoin and indeed in other crypto assets. Crypto equities are in a really exciting space. You have the miners who are benefiting from the sort of dual jet packs of crypto and AI demand. You have Coinbase, which somehow maintains its near monopoly position in the retail space, an incredible business. You have MicroStrategy doing its thing. Look, there are a lot of investors out there who are still uncomfortable holding Bitcoin and Ethereum directly, and they're looking at these crypto equities as, an alternative way to get in. And I'm glad that the equity exists in our ecosystem. We own a lot of it in our ETFs, but it does have that volatility and a not one-for-one relationship with the price of Bitcoin. It may be 1 for 2, or it may be 1 for 0.8, and that's where the risk lies. But for investors looking to get levered exposure to this space, it's been working for a long time, and maybe that will continue to work in the future. Yeah, this question was at a dinner with advisors who have a large allocation to Bitcoin, and it really stopped me in my tracks because I think a lot of us, when we talk about Bitcoin, make sort of a lazy argument. We say something like Bitcoin is becoming digital gold and the US is abusing the dollar, so Bitcoin is valuable. And what the CIO memo said is that's actually two arguments in one. So one bet you're making when you invest in Bitcoin is that Bitcoin will continue to mature and stand shoulder to shoulder with gold. And if it does that, if it matches gold from a size perspective, even at today's prices, you're talking about $900,000 Bitcoin. The other bet you're making is that the US will abuse the dollar, it will pile on debt, that will happen in governments around the world, and the size of the store of value market, the size of the inflation hedging market will grow. The reality as an investor is you only need one of those to be true. The US could not abuse the dollar. Bitcoin could just continue on its journey from sort of idiosyncratic retail asset to mainstream institutional asset, and you could be looking at a 10x in your position. Or the government could abuse the dollar, continue to pile up debt, and the size of the store of value market could grow, and you could see a Bitcoin position double or triple or more. The beauty of it is those two compound. If we see both of those, as I said in my CIO memo, we're talking eventually about seven-figure Bitcoin, and that's my sort of core response. So the answer to the question was no, the US doesn't need to abuse the dollar. The dollar doesn't have to fail for Bitcoin to get to $200,000. All we need is for the trends we've seen over the last 10 years to continue for another year or two. And I have a high degree of confidence that will happen. But if we get both of those events, which honestly, looking at the facts on the ground, seems probable to me, man, it's Katie bar the door. It's sort of the really optimistic scenario that Bitcoin investors have been waiting for. And that's, I think, where we're pointed in 2025, 2026, and beyond. So that's what I tried to convey in that memo, just breaking that one argument into two so people could understand the real drivers of Bitcoin's growth.
Hougan's vision goes beyond short-term predictions. He explains that Bitcoin's unique appeal to institutional investors lies not only in its explosive growth potential, but also in its ability to serve as a hedge against traditional finance and the fiat system. As institutional investors increasingly embrace Bitcoin for portfolio diversification, individual investors could be looking at a rare moment in financial history, one that might not come around again. Stick around to hear Hougan's insights on why this supply crunch could push Bitcoin into uncharted territory and what that might mean for investors like you. You won't want to miss how he sees this playing out and what you should know to prepare.
Look, I'll point to AllianceBernstein, which had a note out of $1.1 million Bitcoin by 2033. For people who don't know, Bernstein is a $1 trillion asset manager that's well known on Wall Street for having some of the best research in the space. And I raise that not because I'm aligned with 2033. I think it's possible we get there earlier, but just because that possibility of seven-figure Bitcoin is now openly being discussed in the most august halls of the leading research shops on Wall Street. And, if we go back in time when Bitcoin was a few $1,000s, the idea of $10,000 Bitcoin seemed extreme. Right now, I know with Bitcoin trading at 70, the idea of $1 million Bitcoin still seems like a fantasy to many people. But you can do the math and you increasingly see TradFi investors doing that and saying that's a possibility. When will we get there? Will we get there? I don't know. But it's now sort of within the Overton window of what people are considering possible. And I think that says a lot about where this industry has gone and where it's going in the future. Yeah, it really does. I think if you get beyond Bitcoin and Ethereum, which have already made it through the regulatory window, they're already ETFs, they're already being used by mainstream institutions. You start to get into a territory where there is more legitimate regulatory risk from Solana on down. There's less clarity on how they will be regulated, whether they are securities in the view of the SEC or the CFTC, a new SEC regime relatively quickly, which means I think we'll see a strong altcoin rally. That's the trend where Washington is moving anyway, but it's going to take longer. We won't have that immediate turnover and immediate flipping the page. There will be more uncertainty and markets dislike uncertainty. So I think those altcoins could face a short-term struggle in that event. I would say that might be a buying opportunity if your window is a few years out, because I do think Washington has broadly flipped and turned to a neutral or pro-crypto view. It's really just this tsunami of institutional assets that are coming into this space. And you can see this in the Bitcoin ETFs, which are back to pulling in $500 million in new flows every day. I will say, Bitwise does something like 10,000 meetings with professional investors every year. Over the last few weeks, there's been a sea change, sort of a phase shift in how those meetings are going. In the past, maybe 1 out of 10 of those led to an allocation. I will tell you anecdotally that over the last 2 weeks, as I've been on the road, the number of those meetings that have led directly to people deciding to get off zero has increased significantly. Wow. So the big catalyst to me is just this wave of institutional money coming into the market. It's accelerating. You can see that in the data, and I expect that to accelerate even further as we turn into 2025. It's a very volatile asset. It's always scary to add a very volatile asset into their portfolio. It's a new asset with regulatory risk. You don't get to be the best performing asset in the world over the last 1, 3, 5, and 10 years without having significant risk. Even those of us who are extremely pro crypto have to recognize that we don't know what regulation will look like exactly. We don't know what the future will hold. So I think there is still some hesitance, and maybe there's still some sort of vestige of reputational risk for these professional investors. It's not yet mainstream to allocate to Bitcoin. You're sticking your neck out, and that's not what traditional finance does. That's sort of fading over time, but I do think that reputational risk still hangs in the mind of some of these investors. But on the other side, they see these inevitable trends. They see the growth in institutional adoption. They see BlackRock building a big business in it. And you're starting to see that scale shift to where they feel more compelled to allocate and more risk in not allocating than they do from staying on the sideline.
With Bitcoin's potential for $100,000 on the horizon, Hougan's predictions are a powerful reminder of what could be next for this market. Whether you're holding Bitcoin or just exploring, it's clear that this year could shape the next era for crypto. Hougan's analysis gives us a lot to think about. Bitcoin is entering uncharted territory, and it might just be one of the biggest financial shifts we'll see in our lifetime. So stay tuned, because if these predictions hold true, we're in for an exciting journey.